Jake always lived inside his head. He's 28 years old, working with computers all day, fixing problems nobody else could see. His mind never stopped talking to itself.
I walked into work.
He'd think about what went wrong yesterday. Eating lunch, he'd worry about what might go wrong tomorrow. His brain was like a radio that never turned off. It's always playing thoughts he'd never say out loud. Most people saw Jake as the quiet guy who sat in the corner. At work, he'd nod and smile when people talked to him, but inside his head, he was having full conversations. Sometimes he'd imagine what he should have said in meetings. Other times he'd practice conversations he might have later. His thoughts jumped from one thing to another like a ping-pong ball. The coffee shop on 5th Street became Jake's morning routine. Same time every day, same order, same quick smile to whoever was working. He liked routines because they meant less thinking, less deciding, less chance for his mind to spiral into worry. That's when he first noticed her. The new girl behind the counter had bright eyes and moved like she was dancing, even when she was just making coffee. Shh. Her name tagged the first few times. He was too busy trying not to look awkward while ordering his usual black coffee with 1 sugar. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday. Jake stood in line, mentally rehearsing his order like he always did. Black coffee, 1 sugar, maybe. A muffin if they looked fresh. But before he even reached the counter, the girl was already reaching for the black coffee pot. She looked up at him and smiled like they'd been friends for years. 1 sugar, right? She asked, even though Jake was sure he'd never told her his order before. Jake nodded, confused, but trying to play it cool. Maybe she just had a good memory for customers. Good workers notice things. That had to be it. But it kept happening. Every morning, she seemed to know exactly what he wanted before he said it, when he thought about switching to a different drink. She'd pause and ask if he wanted to try something new today. When he mentally debated getting a pastry, she'd point out which ones were fresh from the oven. Jake started paying more attention. The girl's name tag said Alex, and she had this way of looking at people like she really saw them. It's not just their face or their clothes, but something deeper. When customers seemed stressed, she'd take extra time with their order. When someone looked sad, she'd find a reason to give them a free cookie or an extra shot of coffee. One morning, Jake was having a particularly bad day. He'd stayed up too late worrying about a presentation at work. His mind was running through all the ways it could go wrong. All the questions he might not be able to answer. All the reasons his boss might think he wasn't good enough for the promotion he'd applied for. As he approached the counter, Jake tried to push these thoughts away. He didn't want to look stressed in front of Alex, but his brain wouldn't cooperate. It kept showing him images of himself stumbling over words, forgetting important points. Watching his coworkers exchange glances when he messed up, Alex looked up at him, and for a moment, Jake felt like she could see right through him. Her smile was different that morning, softer, more understanding. Rough morning, she asked gently, already preparing his usual order. Jake blinked. He hadn't said anything about his morning. He'd tried to look normal, maybe even managed a small smile when he walked in. Kinda, he admitted. Big presentation today. Alex nodded, like she understood completely. You know what? Let me make you something special. Instead of his usual black coffee, she made him something that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. When she handed it to him, she also slipped a small piece of paper under the cup. On the house, she said with a wink.
Ah!
And don't worry about the presentation. You know more than you think you do. Jake stared at her for a moment. How could she know he was worried about not knowing enough? He'd been thinking exactly that while standing in line, the coincidence felt too specific, too perfect. He found a table in the corner and unfolded the piece of paper. In neat handwriting, it said, "Breathe. You've got this. Trust yourself." The coffee was amazing, but the note hit him harder. Nobody had ever told him to trust himself before. Most of his life, people told him to work harder, try harder, be better, but trust himself. That was new. Jake spent the next few minutes watching Alex work. She moved between customers with easy confidence, seeming to know exactly what each person needed. An older man got his coffee extra hot without asking. A woman, in a business suit, got her order rushed when Alex noticed she kept checking her watch. A teenager counting coins got told his drink was part of a promotion, even though Jake was pretty sure there was no promotion, but it was more than just good customer service. Alex seemed to respond to things people hadn't said. She offered tissues to a woman before the woman started crying. She suggested decaf to a man who looked tired but wired. She recommended the banana bread to someone who kept staring at it but seemed to be talking themselves out of buying it. The presentation went better than Jake expected. Every time he felt his confidence wobble, he remembered Alex's note and the way she'd looked at him like she believed in him. When his boss complimented his work afterward, Jake felt something he wasn't used to feeling: pride. That evening, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the morning. He tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe Alex was just really good at reading body language. Maybe she paid attention to subtle cues other people missed. Maybe she was one of those naturally intuitive people who seemed to understand others without trying. But the more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that something unusual was happening. The timing was too perfect. Her responses were too specific. And there was something in her eyes when she looked at him. She was hearing something nobody else could hear. Jake spent the next few days testing his theory without really admitting to himself that's what he was doing. He'd think about different drinks while walking to the counter. He'd imagine specific pastries or mentally complain about the weather. Each time, Alex's responses seemed to match his thoughts in ways that felt impossible, but kept happening anyway. The strangest part wasn't that Alex might be able to hear his thoughts. The strangest part was how that possibility made him feel. Instead of scared or violated, Jake felt understood. For the first time in his life, someone might actually know what was going on inside his head. And instead of running away or looking at him like he was weird, she smiled at him every single day. Maybe being known wasn't as terrifying as he'd always thought it would be. Jake couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying every interaction with Alex, trying to find normal explanations for what seemed impossible. Maybe she was just really good at guessing. Maybe he was more predictable than he thought. Maybe his face showed more than he realized. But deep down, he knew something strange was happening. The next morning, Jake decided to test his theory properly. Instead of his usual routine, he stood in line thinking about ordering hot chocolate. He'd never ordered hot chocolate in his life, especially not in the middle of summer. If Alex really could hear his thoughts, she'd react somehow. As he approached the counter, Alex looked up with her usual bright smile, but then her expression changed slightly. She tilted her head like she was listening to something far away. "Feeling adventurous today?" she asked, reaching for the hot chocolate mix before Jake said a word. Jake's heart started beating faster. That couldn't be a coincidence. "Actually, yeah," he managed to say. "Hot chocolate sounds good." Alex nodded like this made perfect sense, even though it was 80 degrees outside. As she prepared his drink, Jake watched her face carefully. She seemed completely natural, like customers ordered hot chocolate in summer weather all the time. When she handed him the cup, their fingers touched for just a second. Alex looked directly into his eyes, and Jake felt like she was seeing every thought he'd ever had. Should have been scary, but instead it felt like coming home. Over the next week, Jake's experiments became more elaborate. He'd think about random things while ordering purple elephants, flying cars, his childhood dog named Buster. Each time, Alex would find subtle ways to reference his thoughts. She'd doodle an elephant on his cup. She'd mention how traffic was so bad people needed flying cars. She'd ask if he'd ever had pets. The connections were never obvious enough for anyone else to notice. But for Jake, each small response felt like proof of something extraordinary. The real turning point came on a Thursday morning when everything in Jake's life seemed to be falling apart. His computer had crashed the night before, taking 3 days of work with it. His landlord had called about raising the rent. His mom had left a voicemail asking why he never called anymore, which made him feel guilty and defensive at the same time. Jake stood in line at the coffee shop with his mind racing through everything wrong with his life. He wasn't just thinking about his problems, he was spiraling. His inner voice had become mean and critical, listing all his failures, all the ways he was disappointing everyone, all the reasons things would probably get worse. When he reached the counter, Jake tried to smile and act normal. But his thoughts were so loud and chaotic, he could barely focus on ordering Alex. Took one look at him, and her expression immediately softened. She didn't ask what was wrong or try to make small talk. Instead, she quietly made his usual coffee, but added something extra, a shot of vanilla and a sprinkle of cinnamon on top. "This one's special," she said gently, sliding the cup across the counter. "Bad days don't last forever, you know?" Jake stared at her. He hadn't said anything about having a bad day. He'd been trying to hide it. But somehow Alex knew exactly what he needed to hear. "Thank you," he whispered, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything. Alex smiled, and for a moment, Jake felt like everything might actually be okay. That afternoon, Jake did something he never did. He came back to the coffee shop during Alex's evening shift. The place was quieter then, with just a few students studying and couples having quiet conversations. Jake ordered a simple tea and sat in his usual corner table. Watching Alex work, even during the slower evening hours, she seemed to know exactly what each customer needed. She gave extra whipped cream to a girl who looked like she'd been crying. She recommended decaf to a man who seemed jittery and anxious. She drew a smiley face on the cup of a little kid whose mom was trying to cheer him up. But Jake noticed something else.
Alex.
Alex looked tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally drained, like she was carrying the weight of everyone's feelings. She'd take deep breaths and close her eyes for a few seconds. It's like she was trying to clear her head. When the last customer left and Alex started cleaning up, Jake approached the counter. His heart was pounding, but he knew he had to ask. "Alex," he said quietly, "can I ask you something? And please don't think I'm crazy." Looked up from wiping down the espresso machine. For the first time since he'd known her, Alex looked uncertain. "You want to know about the thoughts?" she said simply. Jake felt his world shift. She'd said it so matter-of-factly, like they were discussing the weather. "So it's real?" he asked. "You can actually hear what people are thinking?" Alex nodded slowly. "Since I was little. I can't turn it off. I can't choose when it happens. It's just ... always there." Jake sat down heavily on one of the stools. "That must be overwhelming. You have no idea," Alex said with a sad smile. "Most people's thoughts are so loud, so angry, or scared, or mean. Especially the things they think about themselves. It's like being in a room where everyone's shouting all the time, except they don't know they're shouting." She paused, studying Jake's face. "But your thoughts are different. They're quieter somehow, kinder, even when you're being hard on yourself. There's still gentleness underneath." Jake didn't know what to say. He never thought of his inner voice as gentle. Most of the time, it felt harsh and critical. "Is that why you're always so nice to everyone?" he asked. "Because you can hear their thoughts?" Alex shrugged. "You know how much pain people carry around inside their heads? How can you not try to help? A free cookie or a kind word might be the only good thing someone experiences all day." Jake looked at Alex with new understanding. She wasn't just a cheerful barista. She was someone who carried the emotional weight of every person she encountered, and she chose to respond with kindness instead of pulling away. "Doesn't it make you want to avoid people?" he asked. "Sometimes," Alex admitted. "But then I meet someone like you whose thoughts feel like a peaceful place in a storm. And I remember that this gift might actually be meant for something good." Jake felt something shift inside him. For the first time in his life, someone knew exactly who he was. Not just the quiet exterior he showed the world, but the real thoughts and feelings he kept hidden. And instead of running away, she called his mind a peaceful place. Maybe he wasn't as broken as he'd always believed. After that conversation, everything changed for Jake. Not the world around him, but the world inside his head. Knowing that Alex could hear his thoughts made him pay attention to them in a way he never had before. The next morning, Jake walked to the coffee shop with a strange new awareness. Usually, his mind would wander through random worries and observations without him really noticing. But now, knowing someone else was listening, He found himself actually hearing his own inner voice. It was shocking how negative it was as he walked down the street. Jake caught his thoughts criticizing everything. The way he walked looked awkward. His hair was messy. People probably thought he looked tired. He should have worn a different shirt. That woman walking past probably wondered why he was staring at nothing, when had his mind become so mean to him. At the coffee shop, Alex greeted him with her usual warm smile, but Jake noticed something new in her expression. It was gentle understanding. Like she was hearing every harsh thought he had about himself and felt sad for him. The usual, she asked, already reaching for his coffee cup. Jake nodded, then had a sudden thought. What if he tried to think something nice for once? Just to see what would happen. He focused on thinking about how much he appreciated Alex's kindness. How her smile made his mornings better. How grateful he was that someone like her existed in the world. Alex paused in making his coffee and looked up at him with surprise. Her smile became brighter, more genuine. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's really sweet." Jake felt a warm feeling spread through his chest. Thinking kind thoughts felt good. And seeing Alex's reaction made it feel even better. Over the next few days, Jake started experimenting with his thoughts in a different way. Instead of testing whether Alex could hear them, he started trying to make them worth hearing. When he caught himself thinking something critical about his appearance, he'd try to think something neutral instead. When his mind started spiraling about work problems, he'd try to focus on things he was grateful for. When he saw other people, he'd try to think kind things about them instead of judgments. It was harder than he expected. His brain seemed trained to find problems and flaws everywhere. But slowly, with practice, Jake found he could catch the negative thoughts and redirect them. Alex noticed the change immediately. She started seeming more relaxed around him. Smiles came easier. Sometimes she'd give him little encouraging nods, like she was proud of him for something he couldn't see. One afternoon, Jake was having a particularly tough time at work. His boss had rejected a project he'd spent weeks on, asking for major changes that felt impossible. Jake's mind wanted to spiral into all the familiar patterns. He wasn't good enough. He'd probably get fired. Everyone else was better at this than him. But this time, instead of letting the thoughts run wild, Jake caught himself. He thought about Alex hearing this conversation in his head. Would he want her to listen to him being so cruel to himself? Jake took a deep breath and tried a different approach. The project rejection was disappointing, but it wasn't the end of the world. His boss wasn't trying to hurt him. She just wanted the best possible result. Maybe the changes she wanted would actually make the project better. Maybe this was a chance to learn something new. The thoughts felt forced at first, like he was lying to himself. But as Jake kept practicing this different way of thinking, something strange happened. He actually started believing the kinder thoughts. And believing them made him feel calmer, more confident. That evening, Jake went to the coffee shop during Alex's closing shift. The place was almost empty, and Alex was cleaning the espresso machine with her usual careful attention. "How was your day?" she asked as he approached. "Challenging," Jake admitted. "But I handled it differently than I usually would." Alex looked up with interest. "Different how?" Jake felt a little embarrassed explaining it. Caught myself thinking really negative stuff about myself, and I tried to think nicer things instead. More realistic things. Alex's face lit up with genuine joy. "Jake, that's amazing. Do you know how rare that is? Most people just let their thoughts run on autopilot, especially the mean ones, but you're actually taking control." "It's weird," Jake said. "I never realized how nasty my thoughts were until I knew someone else might be listening." "That's the thing about thoughts," Alex said, leaning against the counter. "We'd never talk to another person the way we talk to ourselves in our heads. But somehow we think it's okay to be cruel to ourselves." Jake nodded. He'd never thought about it that way before. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "When you hear people's thoughts, are they usually as negative as mine were?" Alex's expression became sad. "Worse, usually. People are so incredibly mean to themselves. They call themselves names they'd never call their worst enemy. They focus on every tiny mistake and ignore all the good things they do. It's heartbreaking. That why you're always trying to cheer people up?" partly Alex said. "When you know someone is carrying around that much self-hatred, Even small kindnesses can help. Free cookie might not fix their problems, but it might interrupt the negative thoughts for a few minutes. Jake felt a deep appreciation for Alex that went beyond gratitude. She was using her unusual ability to make the world a little bit kinder, one person at a time. "What about you?" he asked. "All those negative thoughts from other people, doesn't that affect you?" Alex was quiet for a moment. "It used to be overwhelming, but I've learned to think of it like being a lighthouse. People are going through, but I can try to be a steady light they can navigate toward." Jake looked at Alex with new respect. She wasn't just someone with an unusual gift. She was someone who had chosen to use that gift to help others, even when it came at a personal cost. "You know, it's funny," Jake said. "Before I knew you could hear my thoughts, I was embarrassed about them. But now that I know you can hear them, I want them to be better. It's not just for you, but for me." Alex smiled. "That's the best part about all of this. You're not just changing your thoughts because someone else is listening. You're changing them because you deserve to be treated kindly, even by yourself." As Jake walked home that night, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in his life, he was actually friends with the voice in his head, and that friendship was changing everything. 3 weeks after Jake started changing his thoughts, something unexpected happened. He stopped worrying about what Alex might hear at first. Jake had been careful about every thought, trying to keep them positive and clean. But as days passed, he realized Alex never judged him for anything she heard. When he had a bad day and his thoughts turned dark, she'd just offer extra kindness. When he was excited about something and his mind raced with happy thoughts, she'd share in his joy. Slowly, Jake began to relax and just be himself in his own head. One Saturday morning, the coffee shop was busier than usual. Jake waited in a long line, watching Alex handle the rush with her usual grace. But he noticed something different about her today. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than just being busy. Her smile seemed forced, and she kept rubbing her temples between customers. When Jake finally reached the counter, Alex looked up at him with relief. "Thank goodness for a familiar face," she said, but her voice sounded strained. "Rough morning?" Jake asked. Alex glanced around at the crowded shop. Everyone's stressed about different things. Work deadlines, relationship problems, money worries. When 30 people are all thinking anxious thoughts at the same time, it gets really loud in here. Jake looked around the coffee shop with new understanding. He'd never thought about what it must be like for Alex to be surrounded by all those racing minds. "Is there anything I can do to help?" he asked. Alex smiled, and for the first time that morning it looked genuine. It's just thinking calm thoughts. "Helps more than you know. Your mind is like a quiet spot in a noisy room." Jake decided to do something he'd never done before. Instead of taking his coffee and leaving, he found a table where Alex could see him and spent the morning working on his laptop. Every time she looked stressed, he'd focus on thinking peaceful thoughts, memories of quiet walks. The feeling of sunshine on his face, the sound of rain on windows, he wasn't sure if it helped.
Ow.
But Alex seemed to stand a little straighter each time she caught his eye. That afternoon, Jake made a decision. He waited until Alex's shift was almost over, then approached the counter one more time. "Alex," he said, "would you like to take a walk? Somewhere quiet away from all the noise?" Alex looked surprised, then grateful. "I'd love that. Give me 10 minutes to close up." They walked to a small park a few blocks away. It was peaceful there, with just the sound of birds and leaves rustling in the breeze. Alex sat down on a bench and immediately looked more relaxed. "Better?" Jake asked, sitting beside her. "So much better," Alex said, taking a deep breath. "No idea what it's like to have your head constantly filled with other people's worries." "I'm starting to understand," Jake said. "Today in the coffee shop, watching you handle all those customers while dealing with their thoughts, that must be exhausting." Alex nodded. "Most people don't realize how loud their minds are. They're not just thinking one thing at a time. They're thinking about what they need to do later, what they did wrong yesterday, what other people might think of them, whether they look okay, if they have enough money, if their boss likes them. It's like a constant stream of worry and judgment. And you hear all of it?" "All of it," Alex confirmed. "Every mean thing people think about themselves. every worry they're carrying, every judgment they make about others. It's overwhelming. He felt a wave of sympathy for Alex. He'd been so focused on his own experience of having his thoughts heard that he hadn't fully considered what it cost her to hear them. "How do you handle it?" he asked. "I've learned to focus on the good thoughts when I can find them," Alex said. A parent thinking about how much they love their child, someone feeling grateful for a beautiful day, a person deciding to be kind to someone else. Those thoughts help balance out all the negative ones. And my thoughts? How do they sound to you? Alex turned to look at him directly. "Your thoughts are different, Jake. Even when you're being hard on yourself, there's still kindness underneath. You think about other people with compassion. You notice small, beautiful things. You worry about not hurting anyone's feelings. Your mind is like a gentle place." Jake felt something warm spread through his chest. "I never thought of my thoughts as gentle. They always seem so critical and anxious to me. It can be both." Alex said, "You do have anxiety and self-doubt, but you also have empathy and hope. You think about how to make things better, not just about what's wrong. That's rare." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching people walk their dogs and children play on the playground. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said eventually. "Have you always been able to hear thoughts, or did it start at some point?" "Always," Alex said. "As a kid, I thought everyone could hear each other's thoughts. I'd respond to what people were thinking instead of what they said out loud. It took my parents a while to figure out what was happening. It must have been confusing. Terrifying, actually. Imagine being 5 years old and hearing all the complicated, scary thoughts adults have. I learned pretty quickly to pretend I couldn't hear anything." Jake tried to imagine growing up with that burden. "Is that why you became so good at helping people? Because you knew what they really needed?" "Partly," Alex said. "But also because I realized that if I had to live with this ability, I wanted to use it for something good. I couldn't make the thoughts stop, but I could choose how to respond to them. Could have used it differently," Jake pointed out. "You could have taken advantage of knowing what people think." Alex looked horrified at the suggestion. "Never. These thoughts aren't meant for me. They're private things people never chose to share. The least I can do is treat them with respect." Jake felt a deep admiration for Alex. She'd been given an ability that could easily be misused, but she'd chosen to use it only for kindness. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being the kind of person who hears people's deepest thoughts and responds with compassion. For showing me that my thoughts matter. For helping me learn to be kinder to myself." Alex smiled, and it was the most genuine, peaceful smile Jake had ever seen from her. "Thank you for having thoughts worth listening to," she said, "for making me remember that this gift isn't just a burden. Sometimes it's a way to connect with someone who really understands." As they walked back toward town, Jake realized that their friendship had become something he'd never experienced before. Complete honesty, complete acceptance, and the strange, wonderful feeling of being truly known by another person. 6 months later, Jake barely recognized the person he used to be. The change hadn't happened overnight. It was more like watching a plant grow, so gradual you don't notice it day by day. But then suddenly you realize everything is different. Jake still went to the coffee shop every morning, but now it felt less like a routine and more like visiting a friend. Alex would light up when she saw him, and Jake knew it wasn't just because his thoughts were peaceful. They'd developed a real friendship that went beyond her unusual ability. Some mornings, Jake would arrive early and help Alex set up chairs or wipe down tables. Other days, he'd stay late during her evening shift, keeping her company when the shop was quiet. They developed their own way of communicating, sometimes with words, sometimes with looks, and sometimes through the thoughts Alex could hear, but Jake was learning to share more intentionally. The biggest change was in Jake's relationship with himself. The voice in his head had become like a good friend instead of a harsh critic. When problems came up at work, instead of panicking, Jake would think through solutions calmly. When he made mistakes, instead of calling himself names, he'd figure out how to do better next time. It wasn't that his life had become perfect. Jake still had bad days, still felt anxious sometimes, still struggled with self-doubt. But now, when these feelings came up, he didn't fight them or let them spiral out of control. He'd acknowledge them, be gentle with himself, and look for ways. To move forward, Alex had taught him something important. Thoughts were like weather. They came and went, changed and shifted, but they didn't have to control him. One Tuesday morning, Jake walked into the coffee shop to find Alex looking upset. She was going through the motions of making drinks, but her usual warmth was missing. Even her smile looked forced. Jake waited until the morning rush died down, then approached the counter. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. Alex glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "There's a man who comes in here sometimes. He sits in the corner and his thoughts are really dark. Angry thoughts about people, violent fantasies. It makes me feel sick to hear them." Jake looked toward the corner where a middle-aged man sat alone, reading a newspaper. From the outside, he looked completely normal. "Is he dangerous?" Jake asked. "I don't think so," Alex said. "He's never done anything wrong here. But his thoughts are so full of hate and anger. It's like having poison poured into your head." Jake felt a surge of protectiveness for Alex. "What can I do?" Alex looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "You've spent months helping me learn to think better thoughts. I want to help you deal with the bad ones." Alex's eyes filled with tears. "Jake, that's sweet, but there's nothing you can do. You just have to endure it until he leaves." "Maybe not," Jake said. "What if I sat near him and focused really hard on thinking positive things? Would that help balance it out?" Alex stared at him. "You'd do that?" "Of course I would. You've made such a difference in my life. Let me try to make a difference in yours." Jake bought a coffee and a muffin, then sat at the table next to the angry man. He opened his laptop and pretended to work, but really he was concentrating on filling his mind with the most peaceful, positive thoughts he could manage. He thought about sunny days and his favorite songs. He remembered the feeling of accomplishing something difficult at work. He imagined acts of kindness he'd witnessed, people helping each other, moments of genuine human connection. He thought about how grateful he was for Alex's friendship and how much his life had improved since meeting her. At first, Jake wasn't sure if it was working. But gradually, he noticed Alex's posture relaxing behind the counter. Her smile became more genuine. When she caught his eye, she mouthed "thank you" with real relief on her face. The angry man finished his coffee and left after about 20 minutes. As soon as he was gone, Alex hurried over to Jake's table. "That was amazing," she said, sitting down across from him. Her thoughts were it's like having music playing loud enough to drown out noise. I could still hear his anger, but it didn't overwhelm me the way it usually does." Jake felt proud in a way he'd never experienced before. "So it actually helped. More than you know. Usually when he's here, I spend the rest of the day feeling anxious and upset. But today, thanks to you, I feel okay." From that day forward, whenever Alex was struggling with particularly difficult thoughts from customers, Jake would find ways to help. Sometimes he'd sit nearby and think calming thoughts. Other times, he'd engage Alex in cheerful conversation that gave her mind something positive to focus on. But Jake realized he was getting something out of this too. Consciously choosing to think kind, peaceful thoughts was making him a happier person overall. The more he practiced focusing on good things, the more naturally good thoughts came to him. One evening, as they walked through the park after Alex's shift, she stopped suddenly and turned to him. "Jake, I need to tell you something." "Okay," he said, curious about her serious tone. "When I first realized you might figure out about my ability, I was scared. Most people would either think I was crazy, or they'd be freaked out and stop coming around. But you did something completely different." "What did I do?" "You used it as a reason to become a better person. Instead of being upset that someone could hear your thoughts, you decided to make your thoughts worth hearing. That's incredible." Jake felt a warm glow of happiness. "I learned that from watching you. You could have been bitter about having to hear everyone's private thoughts. Instead, you use it to help people. You inspired me to be better. We've helped each other," Alex said. "You've shown me that this ability doesn't have to be just a burden. When it connects me with someone like you, it's actually a gift." Continued walking, both lost in their own thoughts that were kinder and more hopeful than either of them had ever imagined possible. Jake realized that finding someone who could hear his thoughts had taught him the most important lesson of his life, The conversation you have with yourself matters more than any other conversation you'll ever have. And when you learn to make that conversation kind, patient, and encouraging, everything else starts to fall into place. As they reached the edge of the park, Alex smiled at him, not because she heard something funny in his thoughts, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Jake replied, and meant it completely. Some connections, Jake had learned, go deeper than words. Sometimes being truly known by another person is exactly what you need to finally start knowing yourself